on global climate change and the response. I'm Wang Can from School of Environment, Tsinghua University. Today, we will talk about the key technologies to achieve carbon neutrality. In this class, we will look at the technology needs, discuss some key technologies specifically, and then briefly talk about the way to promote R&D for carbon neutrality. Before discussing the issue in detail, let's digress for a while to have a quick look at some core background related to carbon neutrality. Firstly, why should we achieve carbon neutrality? Paris Agreement sets up a goal to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius, preferably to 1.5 degrees Celsius, compared to pre-industrial levels. It is already known that to achieve 2-degree target, the world must achieve net zero carbon emissions in the second half of this century. Well, to ensure 1.5 degree target within reach, the time for the world to achieve net zero carbon emission needs to move earlier to 2050. So in short, carbon neutrality is necessary to achieve the goal of Paris Agreement. What is carbon neutrality? According to the definition of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that's IPCC, carbon neutrality or net zero CO2 emissions refers only to carbon dioxide emissions and is a state of balance between the CO2 emitted into the atmosphere and the CO2 removed from the atmosphere. But in actual practice, organizations often use the term carbon neutrality to include all greenhouse gas emissions when they announce their ambitious emission reduction targets. The non-greenhouse gas regulated by UNFCCC include methane, nitrous oxide, and other 4 kinds of F gases. Carbon removal from the atmosphere is called carbon sinks, which is any system that absorbs more carbon than it emits. The main natural carbon sinks are soil, forests, and oceans, which remove about 10 gigatons of CO2 per year globally. While the annual global CO2 emission reached nearly 40 gigatons in 2019, almost 4 times of the natural sinks. To date, no artificial carbon sinks are able to remove carbon from atmosphere on the necessary scale to reach net zero emission. That's why it is essential to reduce carbon emissions in order to reach carbon neutrality. Then the next question is, how big is the carbon neutrality task? These 2 figures from the IEA report show the energy-related CO2 emissions in the world and in China, respectively. Total world energy-related CO2 emission has been continuing increased during the recent 30 years and reached 33.6 gigatons in 2019, of which 42% was from electricity and heating generation, 24% from transportation, and 19% from industry. If we look at China, China emitted 9.9 gigatons of carbon dioxide, accounting for about 30% of the world total. Among them, over 50% of emission is from electricity and heat. Then industry and transportation account for 28% and 9% respectively. Therefore, we don't really need to think much to understand that these sectors will be the focuses for mitigation and the scale of CO2 reduction is on the magnitude order of dozens of gigatons, which is a huge task facing us. Now, let's return back to the question of what technologies are needed to realize carbon neutrality goal. This slide shows a schematic drawing that illustrates the net zero emission pathway and its underlying supportive technologies. The technologies could be classified into 4 categories, including low carbon, zero carbon, end-use energy consumption technologies, zero carbon electric power system, negative emission technologies, and non-CO2 greenhouse gas emission reduction technologies. The first 3 are important pillars and have been shown on this slide. For the end-use energy consumption, they exist in a wide range of areas, covering industries, transportation, and building. In terms of decarbonization methods, such technologies can be classified into 2 types. Firstly, energy efficiency improvement through structural adjustment, product substitution, process re-engineering, and behavioral change from the consumer. Secondly, reduction of end-use fossil fuel through fuel substitution and electrification. In addition to the development of traditional renewable energies such as wind, PV, and hydropower, zero carbon power system also requires a significant increase in non-traditional new energies like geothermal, biomass, nuclear, and hydrogen, along with the significant proportion of intermittent renewables in power generation. Enhanced and advanced energy storage and smart grid system will be highly demanded to balance the new energy system. The third category is negative emission technology, which include agricultural and forest carbon sequestration, carbon capture, utilization, and storage, called CCUS, bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, BECCS, and direct air carbon capture and storage, DACCS. This table uses 3-level structure to further elaborate the energy-related carbon neutrality technology system, which have 3 categories with 2 or 3 components of each, and numbers of specific technologies. A zero carbon electric power system consists of clean power sources, energy storage, and smart grid. Zero carbon end-use energy system mainly covers energy efficiency improvement and fossil fuel substitution technologies. While for the negative emission technology, we have nature-based solution and artificial removal options like CCS, BECCS, and DACCS. This table shows the comparison of 3 categories of technologies from several important aspects. For the end use, which accounts about 40% of CO2 emissions in China, it's no doubt to have large emission mitigation potential and will play main force role in the way forward to carbon neutrality. It has a wide range of technologies, including almost all production and consumption activities through 3 major directions: reduce via efficiency improvement, reuse via circular economy, for example, replace via electrification and fossil fuel substitution, and also could be rely on behavior change through the consumer. This type of technology are more mature and ready to be deployed with large scale in the near-run future. For carbon neutrality in sectors like industry, transportation, and building, they will depend on zero carbon electric power system. So on the strategy of electrification, it is foreseeable that energy demand will greatly grow in spite of efficiency improvement and structural change of energy use. Since almost all sectors need to employ zero carbon electric power, the electric system is at the heart of technology for carbon neutrality. A revolutionary shift in this system or fundamental restructure will be needed, mainly towards renewable energy for deep decarbonization. There are three components as introduced: renewable energy as sources, smart grid as transmission, and energy storage. Among these components, renewable energy technology like solar PV, wind, hydropower are more mature and have been already deployed in large scale. But for some others, like battery, despite battery is highly mature, but for the long duration and the long-term energy storage, they are still at the early stages of deployment, and further development will be needed, and more innovation will be expected. Fossil fuel cannot be completely replaced because a small portion has to be retained in the electric power system to stabilize generation and power supply. And some emissions from industry can't be completely reduced because of high cost or immature technology. It is in this reason negative emission technology are necessary as the backup or last resort and final frontier. It is estimated that its contribution to China's emission reduction is about 8 to 10% over the next 40 years, which is relatively smaller, but still it's a big number. Due to the high cost, CCUS technology remains in the pilot stage, and the negative emission technology as a whole is still immature to commercialize at the scale of the gigatons magnitude order. Then, in the next few pages, I will introduce 5 specific key technologies within the big picture just introduced, which include electrification, hydrogen, CCUS, bioenergy, digital technology. For each of them, we will briefly look at their role, potential application, and challenge. So let's firstly have a look at the technology of electrification. As we know, electrification is the replacement of fossil fuel and use energy consumption by zero carbon electricity as expected. So this technology pillar is of particular importance since it covers almost the entire energy system and contributes nearly 15% of cumulative emission reductions relative to current level over the process to the carbon neutrality by 2050 or 2060. This slide shows some roadmap developed by different think tanks for example, both the IEA report and the Tsinghua long-term low-carbon strategy report show this kind of estimation. The first chart on the right side shows that mitigation potential of electrification will grow from about only 300 million tons in 2025 to over 3 billion tons in 2060. Among them, the largest share of over 45% occurs in industry sectors, followed by transportation and the building sector. In 2020, the current status, the total electrification rate is about 27%, and it is predicted to rise to 40 to 60% in 2060 under different scenarios. So that's a huge increase in the future for this technology. Now let's have a look at the application cases of electrification, or what does an electrified society look like? From production side, the power plant is deeply decarbonized with renewable energy or fossil fuel with CCS, providing zero carbon electricity to smart grid system, which transmits electricity to different sectors. From the user side, the largest share of CO2 reduction from electrification will occur in industry, led by a shift away from fossil fuel-fired heating towards industrial heat pumps and electric boilers for low and medium temperature heating and drying needs in agriculture, light industry, and chemical industry. Another important example is to produce steel from scrap in electric arc furnaces, which is called as scrap-based steel production or short process steel making. The largest share of CO2 reduction from electrification, second largest, occur in transportation, mainly through the direct electrification of light-duty vehicles initially, and then heavy-duty vehicle in the longer term using batteries. The use of hydrogen and hydrogen-derived fuels produced by electrolysis also contributes indirectly to transport emissions reductions, particularly during the second half of the period to 2060. Building is also an important sector to achieve mitigation through electrification, with the shift away from coal and other fossil fuels for heating and cooking through heat pumps. Rooftop solar PV is another example of direct production and use of renewable electricity in building. So it is anticipated that electricity will become the main energy carrier in all end-use sectors, although the trends vary significantly. There is a case from coal to electricity program in China of this type of transition, especially carried out in northern region of China. It promoted regenerative electric boilers, heat pumps, and decentralized electric heating instead of original coal-fired heating in the northern China. So there are, of course, challenges in promotion of electrification, many with regard to the technology readiness. And here, some details, spectrum to look at the different technologies maturities. In general, low-carbon electricity end-use technologies are less mature than those in power generation. The technologies such as electric vehicles and heat pumps are commercially available today, but may not yet be fully competitive with existing non-electric technology in use on the market. So the wider application depends on further innovation to improve performance and reduce costs. Other end-use technologies are further behind, particularly in heavy industry and long-distance transportation. In primary steelmaking, for instance, the use of electricity to convert iron ore into steel through electrolysis is still in the stage of prototype and plans for pilot plants. The big projected increase in electricity demand over the next 4 decades calls for a major expansion and transformation of the electricity network. So there is a need to develop both systems consistently to ensure that the increased electricity demand do not trigger more CO2 emissions in power generation from the life cycle perspective. Another challenge from the supply chain is about increases of metal demand to support the system change. While electrification of end uses reduces reliance on fossil fuels, it increases demand for the metals and minerals needed to produce the infrastructure and equipment associated with its wider deployment of electrification. For example, the lithium, nickel, and the cobalt are at the core of the energy transition. They are needed for transmission and the distribution lines, batteries, also the fuel cells. Demand for these materials is projected to grow significantly between 2020 and 2060 with a scale of 20 to 50-fold. So technology innovation is definitely required to relieve the new resources pressure. Now, it comes to hydrogen. Hydrogen as an energy carrier like electricity can be an option to decarbonize energy and use sectors where few alternatives exist, notably long-distance transportation, chemicals, and iron and steel industries. With increasing shares of variable renewables in the electricity generation mix, it is also one of the very few technology options for storing large amounts of electricity over days, weeks, and even months. Stored hydrogen can be used to help balance both seasonal fluctuation in electricity demand and imbalances that may arise between the demand for hydrogen and its supply by off-grid renewable systems. Hydrogen also can be converted into feedstocks for the chemical industry, or in combination with CO2 into synthetic hydropower fuels for the transport sector. From the view of the production, hydrogen can be produced from a variety of primary energies, including natural gas, coal, oil, renewables, and nuclear energy. So there are 3 types of hydrogen with different production chains. while its gray hydrogen is produced by fossil materials such as coke oven gas, and then blue hydrogen is produced by fossil fuel where CCS is applied, which means a zero carbon emission hydrogen, but again, rely on the fossil fuel. The third one is green hydrogen. It's produced by water electrolysis with renewable energy. It is the green hydrogen that has the most promising carbon reduction and environmental performance. The contribution of hydrogen and related fuels to China's energy transition will grow progressively over the period to carbon neutrality by 2060. In the IEA report, hydrogen is expected to reduce 900 million tons of CO2 in 2060, accounting for 80% of which 80% of which will from heavy industry and long-distance transport. In the production side, the electricity will become the dominating energy source with a proportion of about 70%, followed by fossil fuel with CCUS. Then where will be yield of the hydrogen? Hydrogen consists of a broad and long industrial chain, including energy production, hydrogen production, conversion, transport, storage, and retail, application, and end of life. This chart above in the left side shows techniques in different stages and emissions conditions. The initial focus for hydrogen use is the conversion of existing uses of fossil fuel to low carbon hydrogen. So do not immediately require new transmission and distribution infrastructure. This includes hydrogen use in industry, refineries, power plants, and the blending of hydrogen into natural gas for distribution to end users. There are broad range of hydrogen applications. In the electricity sector, hydrogen-based fuels can provide an important low-carbon energy source for power generation, simply through retrofitting existing gas-fired capacity to co-fire with hydrogen. In industry process, hydrogen can be used as reductant for ammonia, steel, methanol, and oil refining. In building sector, hydrogen can be used as heat pump hybrid with boiler, and in transport, very directly, hydrogen can be stored in fuel cell, so it's a new type of electric vehicle. Again, of course, there are challenges for the large-scale use of hydrogen. The value chain for low-carbon hydrogen comprises many technologies needed for produce, transport, store, and consume, each of them at a different stage of maturity. So huge efforts will be needed to ensure a timely and consistent development of those components. Furthermore, the widespread adoption of hydrogen in China will require both modifications to existing infrastructure and the development of new infrastructure to distribute these fuels to the end users, including hydrogen pipelines, refueling stations for hydrogen, for example, large-scale storage facilities, and terminals at the ports. All these new infrastructures need both new technologies and big finance. So ensuring the availability of sufficient low-carbon electricity generation capacity will be another crucial condition. So its large-scale use will also rely on the technology development from the other area, like power generation. As a pilot practice, China sets a fuel cell vehicles as a breaking point for hydrogen industry and promotes a set of supportive policies to overcome the barriers, the challenges, aiming to promote large-scale development of hydrogen in China and also in the world. This chart shows again the detailed analysis on the maturity of different hydrogen technologies made by IEA report. The hydrogen boilers and the fuel cells for residential use and the fuel cell electric vehicle are commercially available, although they face strong competition with more efficient technologies such as heat pumps. But the use of electrolytic hydrogen in heavy industry process is at the demonstration stage. So in general, the transport and building utilization, now it's available in the market. But for the industry and especially for the heavy industry, it's still at a very early stage. The third technology we would like to have a look at is carbon capture, utilization, and storage, CCUS. So CCUS involves major three steps. First one, capturing CO2 at the sources, then compressing it for transportation. The third one is using it or injecting it at a carefully selected and the safe site where it will be permanently stored. CCUS is commonly predicted to play a role very important in China's transition as well as the global transition to carbon neutrality. In large part, it is because of the composition of China's existing energy infrastructure and the large role of coal in the energy mix today. Many of China's existing power and industrial plants have been built relatively recently and could continue operation with CCUS retrofits, avoiding potentially costly early retirements. CCUS is also supportive to the development of hydrogen. It is necessary technology for shifting away from the current gray hydrogen towards blue hydrogen, which is hydrogen production by fossil fuel with CCUS, and is regarded as cost-effective pathway to scale up low-carbon hydrogen production in the short term, although from the long-term perspective, dominant electrolysis hydrogen is a target. CCUS also provides a means of generating negative emissions, where bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, BECCS, and direct air capture with CO2 storage, DACCS, both of which are technologies that can remove CO2 from the atmosphere on a net basis. So in summary, CCUS can facilitate and ensure the transition to carbon neutrality by addressing emissions from the most challenging sectors, providing an expedient solution to scale up low-carbon hydrogen production rapidly and allowing for CO2 removal from the atmosphere through BECCS and DACCS. Different studies may have different anticipation for the specific contribution of CCUS. But there is some common trends or common understanding. For the timeline, there will be a small increase in the next 10 to 15 years. This period will be used to ensure the necessary enabling environment be ready for widespread deployment in the second half of the period to 2060. For the deployment sectors, CCUS focuses initially on reducing emissions from existing large sources, including coal plants, iron and steel plants, cement plants, but later on, it will play a growing role in removing carbon from the atmosphere via BECCS and DACCS to balance the remaining emissions from the most challenging sectors. This type of deployment will account for 50% of CCUS in 2050. Although CCUS is regarded to play a crucial role in carbon neutrality in the future, its authentic contribution to CO2 reduction depends on the rapid deployment and commercialization of capture technologies in each sector. The expansion of CO2 transport and storage networks, as well as the utilization and storage technologies. The maturity of CCUS today varies considerably by technology type and application. Generally speaking, CO2 capture at the energy sector, including fossil fuel power plant and energy transformation like a fuel refinery, is available in the market. But it is still at the demonstration stage in industrial sectors, including cement, steel, and also bioenergy power plants, where it is needed to deliver large emission reductions. For CO2 geological storage, the technology is already in pilot and demonstration stage, but its biochemical utilization in the chemical industry is more on prototype stage. The technology maturity stage is also reflected in the potential challenges facing for CCUS development and deployment, including public concerns on its safety in terms of both safety of operation and permanence of CO2 storage. Also, there is a concern on its high cost and high associated business risks. For example, the revenue from CCUS investment hinges on the carbon price, which needs policy and regulatory framework to ensure. Currently, there are about 40 CCUS projects in demonstration with capacity of 3 million tons a year carried out in China. And hopefully the process will be accelerated to make CCUS deployment at the expected pace and scale in the near future. Now, for bioenergy. Bioenergy is clean energy because its carbon dioxide emission is all from its life cycle fixation by photosynthesis. Therefore, we view bioenergy as a net zero emission energy in terms of CO2. China recently has an estimated 10 to 18 IJ of bioenergy per year, which is available for the collection for the use of bioenergy, and also equals to 6 to 12% of China's total primary energy demand in 2020. China already makes considerable use of waste and residue. Since 2017, China has been the world leader in building bioenergy power plants, contributing 60% of global capacity additions in 2019. Roughly half of these are waste-to-energy plants, mainly fueled by municipal solid waste. In the future, for carbon neutrality pathway, bioenergy is estimated to grow dramatically. The share of bioenergy in China's total primary energy demand increases more than 2 times to 13% by 2060 in the projection, reaching to 16 EJ. Associated with the increase, its contribution to CO2 reduction will reach over 900 million tons in 2060, with a cumulative reduction of 32 gigatons during the whole process. So we can see that it is very significant, important technology in the way for the carbon neutrality. In power generation sector, the share will increase from 3% to 8%, which consumes almost half of total biomass demand, and almost half of bioenergy electricity will be equipped with CCUS. So we see the interlinkage with different technologies. When we look at the importance of bioenergy, we also see the important role of CCUS playing in this technology. Now, let's have a look at the application cases for bioenergy. Usually, bioenergy involves several different sources like straw, forestry residues, animal manure, household waste, waste oil, and sludge, and so on and so forth. They can be processed as solid biofuel or fermented as biogas or liquid fuel, such as bioethanol. In energy sector, bioenergy can be used by direct combustion or co-combustion with coal or natural gas. When CCUS is attached at the end of pipe, it is BE-CCS that has negative emission effect. In industry sector, biofuel products and byproducts can be used as chemical feedstocks for paper making, fiberboard, and plastic. In transport sector, bioethanol and biodiesel are future substitution options for petrol and diesel. So from this type of application, we can see one of the key advantages of bioenergy is that it can use existing infrastructure. For example, biomethane can use existing natural gas pipelines and end-user equipment, while many drop-in liquid biofuels can use existing oil distribution networks and be used in vehicles with only minor or limited alterations. However, there are still challenges for this technology to be deployed at expected pace and scale. The degree of technology maturity remains to be advanced in some relevant technologies. For example, renewable diesel, which plays the most important role in decarbonizing long-distance transportation, especially heavy-duty trucks and shipping. This type of technology still at a very early stage. Resources potential restriction is another challenge. Bioenergy involves multi-dimensional requirements covering abundance of energy crops, water resources, technological adaptivities, land use type, and so on, which pose multi-restrictions upon bioenergy usage. Therefore, coordinated governance and guidance are highly demanded, as well as a standard system to support the diffusion of this type of technology. In this regard, a number of programs have been launched in China to overcome the challenge and promote the development of bioenergy. One is planning of clean heating in winter in northern China. 100 pilot towns are promoted to blending biomass in heat generation, and we would like to see more and more this type of program to be implemented in the short-term future. Now, the last type of technology we would like to look in this is digital technology, which is an important enabling technology in many areas of decarbonization. It can be implemented in energy production, distribution, consumption, and other cases for better management and higher efficiency. It is estimated that digital technology solution in the fields of energy, manufacturing, agriculture, land use, building services can help reduce global carbon emissions by about 15%, which is very high, very significant components. Digital twin grid is a hot topic, for example, which provides solution for smart grid management in an automatic and remote way. Digital development in green economy is just at a start and facing huge uncertainties. There are three challenges, obviously. First, digital infrastructure itself is energy intensive. Thus, it needs to be further energy efficient and renewable energy based, which rely on both digital technology improvement and energy system transition. Second, the application of digital technology is still in the pilot stage. It's necessary to further expand the application in low carbon transition more specifically and effectively. Third, there might be rebound effect underlying the digitalization due to the increase of efficiency and convenience. So far, we have learned about the three categories of technologies that support carbon neutralization targets. And some of these key measures, including electrification, bioenergy, CCUS, digital, and hydrogen. We see a clear roadmap and technology route to carbon neutrality, but also some problems of immaturity in almost all the key technologies addressed, which means accelerating commercialization of existing and known technologies is pivotal to achieve carbon neutrality. The importance of technology innovation and facilitation is obvious. If we follow the business as usual pathway, maintaining the same level of policy, standards, investment, and technology level, we will drop into a huge gap from achieving neutrality in 2060. Energy emission gap will be 7 to 8 gigaton, while non-CO2 and industrial emission will be 4.5 gigaton. The right chart shows the mitigation potential in terms of technological maturity. More than 90% of the CO2 emission reductions by 2030 are from technologies readily available today, whereas about half of reduction in 2060 relative to 2030 come from technologies that are currently only at the prototype or demonstration phase. Therefore, we have to facilitate the innovation and implementation of technology to fulfill the huge gap for the future. Actually, there are very good progress in technology innovation made in China. From the policy side, low carbon technology innovation has been emphasized by a number of top-down central government policies, such as 14th Five-Year Plan, opinion on new development concept of carbon peak and carbon neutrality, action plan of 2030 carbon peak, and Made in China 2025 key technology roadmap. From funding side, China spent more than 50 billion yuan in low carbon technology innovation in the last year, 2020, accounting for 17% of world total. Besides that, there is a physical and financial tools to incentivize enterprises on the pathway of low carbon innovation and mitigation projects. For institutional side, a number of organizations have been established and dedicated to facilitate and promote technology diffusion in China. For example, the Production Promotion Center, Energy Conservation Center, and the newly built Climate Neutrality Innovation Centers. In general, there are some significant advantages in promoting technological innovation in China. For example, leading top-down facilitative policy planning, strong funding mobilization for national mission, and vigorous incentives supported by vast domestic market. But we are still facing some challenge, and actually it's a big challenge for further promoting low carbon technology innovation. So to tackle this challenge, progress in 3 aspects is supposed to be important. Mobilizing innovative incentive investment and financing to promote enterprises-centered innovation. So using the government motivation to rely on the enterprise-dominated innovation. Enhance the carbon pricing mechanism to provide market a clear and foreseeable carbon price signal, aiming to promote the economic competitiveness of mature low carbon technology. Internalizing carbon price as economic competitiveness of innovation will enhance enterprise willingness to develop, implement, and commercialize low carbon technologies. Also develop and update roadmaps of key technologies like CCUS and strengthen the basic scientific research to support the technology development. Another critical factors to facilitate the low-carbon technology innovation and transition is international cooperation. In face of development and the testing of new technologies, international cooperation will accelerate learning, help avoid duplication of efforts, and identify gaps not yet addressed. When new technologies come into the diffusion phase, international cooperation will accelerate knowledge transfer among countries and also boost the economy of scale through the expanding market in a number of countries. International programs to fund demonstration projects, especially for large and complex technologies, will reduce demonstration costs for low-carbon technologies and accelerate the innovation process. International cooperation can also help to create domestic jobs and industrial capacities, strengthen the reliance of supply chains. These all provide necessary basis for new technology application. So it's no doubt crucial. Then how can we promote international cooperation for technology facilitation? There may be 4 types of cooperation forms. The first one is to set up international program, which can provide funding for low-carbon technology projects, especially funding R&D and demonstration of new technology. For example, the US-China Clean Energy Research Center, the UK-China CCUS Center, and the IEA Technology Collaboration Program, supporting cooperation in 38 technology areas. The China-US Glasgow Declaration on Enhancing Climate Action in the 2020s, announced this week early, agrees to establish working group and to cooperate on deployment and application of technology. It's another tangible example. Second, to cooperatively set up international standards, aiming to accelerate technology development and deployment. The international standards could reduce transaction cost of new technology to scale up its market abroad. Third, international emission trading mechanism can provide a carbon price to cover more countries, which will promote low carbon technology application. Multilateral platforms also provide an important basis for the low carbon technology development and transfer. For example, China's Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, set up one opportunity to work with international partners to help other countries access the best international technologies in the future. As China promised to stop overseas financing of new coal plants, it is foreseeable to have more low-carbon technology transfer and diffusion through the Belt and Road Initiative. The third key element for technologies facilitation is the active and meaningful engagement of society. Societal engagement is crucial to raising public awareness and willingness to pay for the green premium, shifting energy-related behaviors and consumption practices, and exploiting public support for controversial low-carbon technologies. As for the green premium, it refers to the additional cost of choosing a clean technology over one that emits a greater amount of greenhouse gases. If you have read Bill Gates' latest book on climate change, you will find this term is a core concept in the book, and his main argument is to lower the green premium by innovation. individuals actually pay for the green premium and can play a role to bring the green premium down by giving market signal. For example, when you buy an electric vehicle, even though it may cost more, you are saying to the company that make these products, there is demand for these green products, make more and we will buy them. In other words, the additional cost of green technology will finally transfer to the consumer, and the willingness to pay drives the market demand and encourage corporate investment. In addition, the deployment of low-carbon technologies rely on active involvement of citizens. As shown in the middle figure, about 55% of emission reduction require a mixture of the deployment of low-carbon technologies and the active involvement of citizens and consumers. For example, installing a solar water heater or buying an electric vehicle. A final 8% of emission reductions stem from behavioral changes and material efficiency gains that reduce energy demand. For example, flying less for business purposes. However, it is worth noting that not all the behavioral changes for carbon neutrality would be equally easy to achieve everywhere, and the policy interventions would need to draw on insights from behavioral science and take into account existing behavioral norms and cultural preferences. Some behavioral changes may be more socially acceptable than others. Then, how can we contribute to technology facilitation from behavior change? The answer is more now and escape from carbon-intensive lifestyle. More specifically, we need to avoid unnecessary carbon consumption and reduce waste by behavior change. Second, we can shift to more efficient technologies and services, such as switching to electric vehicles. Third, we can encourage the improvement of efficiency of existing technology by purchasing green products. So today, we first introduced the background of climate goal and important sectors for carbon neutrality. Then we move into technology structure of three pillars: zero carbon electricity, low carbon end-use energy consumption, and negative emissions. Some typical measures are introduced, including electrification, hydrogen, CCUS, bioenergy, digital technology. Finally, we talked about how to facilitate clean technology from three aspects. Here are three take-home messages. First, all technologies matter on the way to the net zero emissions. Achieving climate goal can't leave any of them behind. Second, now the challenges exist in the insufficient deployment rather than the low availability of technologies. Last but not least, innovative policy systems, international cooperation, and active involvement of citizens are important to facilitate technologies and steering to a net zero carbon future. So that's all of this class. Thank you for your attention. Now is the question and answer session. So anyone, I see